It started with a smell, coming through the tenement windows of South Philadelphia, climbing the fire escapes of Chicago, drifting down the stairwells of New York, a smell that drew complaints, inspectors, and in some cases the police. It was just Sunday sauce. But in 1912, that was enough. Number 22 was officially logged as a public nuisance inconsistent with American standards of living. Number 17 was confiscated by a Prohibition agent who didn't know the difference. Number 9 was illegal in 14 states. They made it anyway, all of them, every Sunday, because no law passed by men who had never tasted it was going to take it from them. 25 recipes, banned, confiscated, and outlawed, still here. Let's count them down. Number 25, lardo on bread. Before Americans understood what charcuterie was, Italian immigrants in New York and Philadelphia were curing fatback in their apartment basements, rosemary, garlic, black pepper, a slab of pork fat packed in salt and left in a cold corner for 3 months until it turned silky and deeply savory, white as snow, ready to be sliced paper thin and spread on warm toasted bread in slow, fragrant pools. Curing meat in a residential building was technically prohibited under New York City tenement codes enacted in 1901. The law was aimed at reducing fire risk. The Italian families kept doing it anyway because the alternative was going without the flavor that made bread taste like home. Pork fatback cost 4 cents a pound in 1910. Rosemary and garlic came from the window box. A single cured slab lasted a month. Today, restaurants in Manhattan charge $18 for a small board of lardo with crackers and call it a discovery. The grandmothers who made it in basement cold rooms would not recognize the price. The taste they would know before they sat down. Number 24. Braciole and Sunday. Gravy-thin slices of beef pounded flat with a meat mallet until they were almost translucent. Spread with breadcrumbs, hard-boiled egg, parsley, and garlic. Rolled tight, tied with kitchen string, browned in olive oil before dropping into a pot of slow-simmering tomato sauce where they cooked for 3 hours until the beef was so tender it gave way to a spoon and the braising liquid had absorbed everything the filling had to offer. Braciole was Sunday, not a Sunday dish. Sunday itself, announced by the smell of browning meat and garlic in olive oil that reached the hallway before you opened the apartment door. A pound of beef round cost 18 cents in 1922. A can of crushed tomatoes was 12 cents. Italian-American families in Brooklyn and the south side of Chicago put this on the stove at 8 in the morning and ate at 2 in the afternoon. The 6 hours in between were the whole point. The long cook was not a recipe instruction. It was a statement about what Sundays were for. Number 23, salted cod stew bacala, salt cod. It arrived in America already preserved, hard as a board and white as chalk, and it smelled so powerfully of salt and dried fish that hardware store owners in Little Italy reportedly refused to let customers carry it through their shops. The cod was soaked in cold water for 48 hours. The water changed twice a day until the fish softened and the salt retreated. What remained was flaky, firm, deeply flavored, ready to hold its shape in a stew of tomatoes, olives, capers, and potatoes, cooked low and slow until the sauce turned glossy and the fish broke into large, tender pieces that tasted of the sea. Salted cod cost 8 cents a pound in 1915 and stored without refrigeration for months. Immigrant families along the waterfronts of Baltimore and Boston made this every Friday when the church required no meat. It asked nothing of the cook except time and the willingness to smell like salt for a day. It delivered everything. Number 22, aglio e olio, garlic and olive oil, 2 ingredients, and pasta. This was the dish that New York City housing inspectors put in their 1912 report as the primary source of the tenement smell they had been sent to investigate. Garlic sliced thin and cooked slowly in olive oil over the lowest possible heat until it turned pale gold and the oil absorbed its flavor entirely. The kitchen filled with a smell so rich and deep, it seemed impossible it came from 2 ingredients. Tossed with pasta cooked in well-salted water, a pinch of dried chili flakes, a handful of parsley. Done. Olive oil cost 32 cents a quart in 1912. Garlic was practically free, grown in pots on fire escapes across lower Manhattan. A serving cost under 5 cents. This dish, which Roman cooks had been making for 2,000 years, was considered in 1912 to be evidence of an undesirable lifestyle. The recipe has not changed in 2 millennia. Only the zip code of the kitchen making it has. Number 21, stuffed artichokes. Artichokes trimmed and stuffed between every leaf with a mixture of breadcrumbs, garlic, parsley, pecorino romano, and olive oil. Stood upright in a pot with an inch of water. Steamed for 45 minutes until the outer leaves pulled free with a gentle tug and the heart at the bottom was soft enough to eat with a spoon. Artichokes cost 4 cents each at Italian-owned produce stands in New York in 1925. A single stuffed artichoke was a full meal. The breadcrumb filling, fragrant with garlic and cheese, fell out between the leaves as you ate and mixed with the cooking liquid at the bottom of the bowl. Nothing was left behind. Nothing was ever left behind in an Italian kitchen. Number 20. Polenta with sausage and broccoli. Rabe. Coarse cornmeal stirred into boiling salted water for 40 minutes without stopping, the pot spitting and bubbling like something alive, until the polenta pulled away from the sides and held its shape when a spoonful was dropped on a plate, topped with crumbled Italian sausage browned in a pan. Bitter broccoli rabe blanched and sautéed in garlic and olive oil until it turned a deep, glossy green that tasted of earth and something pleasantly sharp. In 1930, Italian women in the Bronx were fined by the City Parks Department for cutting broccoli rabe from a vacant lot that had been officially designated for park development. The lot had been a weed field for 11 years. The women paid the fines and came back the following Sunday with scissors. Cornmeal cost 8 cents a pound in 1930. Italian sausage was 20 cents in the markets of South Philadelphia and the North End of Boston. Broccoli rabe grew wild in vacant lots across every major city, free to whoever wanted it. Food writers rediscovered it 40 years later and called it foraging. The grandmothers called it Tuesday. Number 19. Cicoria ripassata. The Italian immigrant women of South Philadelphia and the East Village did not wait for a farmer's market. They walked to the nearest vacant lot with a paper bag and a pair of scissors and came back with wild chicory, dandelion greens, or whatever bitter green was growing in the cracked ground between the buildings. The greens were blanched in boiling salted water until they softened, drained, dropped into a pan with olive oil, crushed garlic, and a pinch of dried chili flakes, tossed over high heat until the greens crisped slightly at the edges and absorbed the oil entirely, eaten alongside bread or pasta, or simply alone in a bowl with a squeeze of lemon. Wild greens cost nothing in 1922 because they were growing everywhere nobody was looking. Olive oil cost 32 cents a quart. The grandmothers understood that bitterness, properly handled, is a flavor, not a flaw. First pattern break. Here is what the health inspectors and the immigration authorities and the tenement code enforcers were actually doing when they came after the Italian kitchens. They were not protecting public health. They were enforcing a version of American identity that did not include garlic. The smell of slow-cooking food, the smell of curing meat, the smell of wine fermenting in a back room, the smell of cheese aging on a shelf. All of it was considered evidence of foreignness, of failure to assimilate, of a refusal to become the kind of American the authorities had in mind. The laws against it were not about safety. They were about smell. They were about the insistence that American food should not announce itself, should not linger in the hallway, should not drift down the stairs and out into the street. The grandmothers ignored every one of those laws and kept cooking. The food survived. The laws are footnotes. Number 18. Sunday gravy. Not marinara, not tomato sauce. Sunday gravy is a different thing entirely. Anyone who grew up Italian-American knows the difference the moment they smell it. Meatballs, sausage, and braciole, browned separately in olive oil, and then lowered into a pot of crushed tomatoes that has been slowly cooking with garlic, basil, and a pinch of sugar since early morning. The meats give up their fat and flavor to the tomatoes over 4 hours of the gentlest possible simmer. The tomatoes in return give the meats a depth and sweetness they could not achieve alone. By afternoon, the sauce is brick red and thick enough to coat the back of a wooden spoon without running. A large can of crushed tomatoes cost 14 cents in 1935. The meats cost whatever was affordable that week. The gravy was the constant. In Italian-American households from Providence to Chicago, Sunday gravy was the anchor of the week. It was made in the same pot by the same hands on the same morning for decades. When the woman who made it was gone, the family felt it in the kitchen before they felt it anywhere else. Number 17. Red wine vinegar. In 1921, a Prohibition agent in Chicago's Taylor Street neighborhood raided the home of a woman named Filomena Russo on a tip that she was producing wine in her basement. What he found was a ceramic jug of red wine vinegar made from wine that had turned, the way wine in Italian households always eventually turned, into something more useful than it began. He confiscated it anyway. Red wine vinegar was made from leftover table wine allowed to ferment a second time in an open crock, inoculated with a piece of the mother, the culture that converted alcohol to acetic acid. It cost nothing, because the wine it started from had already been drunk down to its last glass. It went into salads, into pickles, into braises, into everything. Italian immigrant kitchens ran on it. Filomena got her jug back after 3 days and a visit from her husband to the precinct. She made another batch the same week. Number 16. Rabbit braised in white wine. In 1922, keeping live rabbits in a New York City apartment building was illegal under the animal husbandry codes. This did not prevent Italian families from doing it, because the alternative was buying meat at prices they could not always afford, and a single breeding pair of rabbits solved that problem permanently. The rabbit, once dispatched, was cut into pieces and braised in white wine, garlic, rosemary, and a little olive oil in a covered pot for 2 hours over very low heat. The meat fell from the bones, the braising liquid reduced into a glossy, herb-scented sauce that smelled of the countryside in Campania, or Lazio, or wherever the family had come from. Rabbit cost nothing if you raised it yourself. The wine for braising was whatever was left in the bottle. Rosemary grew on the fire escape. This was not a recipe. It was a self-sustaining food system running inside a tenement apartment. It worked. Number 15. Fave e cicoria, fava beans, and wild chicory. A dish so old it appears in the writings of ancient Rome. So poor it was the food of field workers for 2,000 years. So delicious that it appears today on the menus of Italian restaurants in New York, charging $28 a bowl. Dried fava beans cooked until they collapsed into a thick, earthy puree the color of pale stone. Poured into a bowl, topped with wild chicory greens wilted in olive oil and garlic until they turned soft and deeply bitter. The bitterness of the greens against the sweetness of the bean puree was not an accident. It was the point. It was balance achieved through nothing more expensive than patience and a handful of wild greens. Dried fava beans cost 6 cents a pound in 1920 in Baltimore's Little Italy. Wild chicory grew in every vacant lot in the city. Italian immigrant women who gathered it knew which plants to take and which to leave. That knowledge came from the hillsides of Puglia. It did not require a farmer's market or a foraging app. Number 14. Tripe alla Romana. Tripe is the stomach lining of a cow. This is the fact that separates the people who grew up eating it from the people who did not. The distance between those two groups in early 20th century America was almost exactly the distance between Italian immigrants and everyone else. Tripe cleaned and simmered for 2 hours until it turned tender and faintly gelatinous. Finished in a tomato sauce with white wine, mint, and pecorino romano until the sauce clung to every fold of the tripe and the whole pot smelled of something deep and ancient and completely unlike anything else on the stove. Tripe cost 4 cents a pound in 1915 at butcher shops in Little Italy, because nobody else wanted it. Italian grandmothers understood that nobody else wanting it was the best news possible. They bought it by the pound. They fed their families on it for days. They let the people with more money eat the expensive cuts. The expensive cuts did not taste better, they just cost more. Second pattern break. Here is what happened to Italian immigrant food once it became fashionable. The same dishes that were described in 1912 housing reports as evidence of unsanitary living conditions were, by 1985, the centerpiece of upscale Italian restaurants, charging $40 an entree. The garlic that was a nuisance in a tenement kitchen became aromatic in a restaurant with white tablecloths. The tripe that was considered a sign of poverty became awful cuisine on a menu with a sommelier. The wild chicory that Italian women were fined for gathering became a foraged ingredient in a tasting menu. Nothing about the food changed. Everything about who was eating it changed. Everything about what it meant changed. Everything about what it cost changed. There is a word for what happened here, and it is not appreciation. It is appropriation without apology. The people who built these dishes across generations of poverty and immigration and selective enforcement of tenement codes were, by the time the food became fashionable, mostly gone. Nobody thought to ask them what they made of it. Nobody thought to send them a share of the $40. The grandmothers had done their work and been forgotten. Their food had been discovered. Those are two different things, and the difference matters. Number 13. Zuppa di lenticchie. Lentil soup was Friday food in Italian immigrant households. The meal that appeared when meat was not eaten, and the pantry needed to work without it. Dried lentils required no soaking and no fussing. They cooked themselves in salted water with a carrot, a stalk of celery, a chopped onion, and a pour of olive oil. They softened into the liquid and thickened it from within until the whole pot smelled of something deep and earthy that bore no resemblance to the dry handful of lentils it had started as 40 minutes earlier. A pound of dried lentils cost 7 cents in 1928 and fed 6 people. A bunch of celery was 3 cents. The olive oil was already on the counter. Italian grandmothers in the north end of Boston and the Hill neighborhood of St. Louis made this every Friday without variation, without recipe, without measuring anything. The lentils were done when they were done. The soup was right when it smelled right. Some knowledge does not fit on an index card. Third pattern break. I made Concetta Ferrara's Sunday gravy last October, using a recipe reconstructed from her granddaughter's description of how it smelled. 3 types of meat. A long morning. A pot that weighed more than I expected. I ate it at 2 in the afternoon at a kitchen table by myself and understood, for the first time, why the health inspectors kept getting sent back to the same addresses. That smell does not stay in the kitchen. It goes everywhere. It announces something. It says that someone in this building is serious about Sunday. It says that someone has been standing over a pot since 6 in the morning. It says that someone has decided, despite the building and the city and the century, to cook the way her mother cooked and her mother's mother before her. The authorities in 1912 called that a nuisance. I would call it a declaration. Number 12. Pasta e fagioli. Pasta and beans. The title tells you everything and nothing because the gap between what that sounds like and what it actually is, when made correctly, could fill a book. Small pasta, usually ditalini or small elbows, cooked directly in a broth made from dried cannellini beans that have been simmered with garlic, rosemary, and a rind of Parmesan cheese for 2 hours. The beans turn creamy. The broth turns so thick it barely pours. The pasta finishes in the bean broth, absorbing it, releasing its own starch into the liquid until the whole pot is thick enough to eat with a fork. Cannellini beans cost 7 cents a pound in 1928. Parmesan rinds were free, saved from the wedge of cheese that was purchased by the ounce and rationed across the week. A pot of pasta e fagioli fed 6 people for under 30 cents. Thomas Jefferson ate a version of this during his time in Italy and tried to introduce it to America on his return. America was not interested. The Italian grandmothers of Mulberry Street did not need Thomas Jefferson's endorsement. They made it anyway. Number 11. Pickled eggplant. Every autumn, Italian grandmother kitchens across New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia turned into small-scale preservation factories. Eggplant sliced thin, salted and pressed overnight to draw out the bitterness, packed into jars with vinegar, garlic, chili flakes, and olive oil, and sealed. The result tasted of summer concentrated into a jar. It came out of the cabinet on Sunday, alongside the antipasto and the bread, without anyone having to be asked. In 1932, 3 Italian women in Newark were cited under state canning regulations for sharing jars of preserved eggplant at a church bake sale. They had not been trying to sell anything. They had been trying to share. The inspectors had missed the distinction entirely. Eggplant cost 3 cents a pound in September in Italian produce markets in 1932. The vinegar was homemade. The garlic came from the window box. Everything that went into the jar had been paid for weeks earlier. What came out of the jar on a January Sunday was summer itself, preserved by women who understood that you do not let August go without saving some of it for February. Number 10. Arancini. Rice balls. Sicilian street food made from leftover risotto or plain boiled rice, packed around a center of ragu and peas, rolled into a ball, coated in breadcrumbs, and fried in deep oil until the outside turned the color of amber and the inside was molten and fragrant. The whole thing sat in the hand with a weight that said this was not a snack. This was a meal. Leftover rice cost nothing. The ragu was stretched from Sunday's sauce. Breadcrumbs were made from yesterday's bread. The oil for frying was the only real expense. Italian pushcart vendors in Lower Manhattan sold arancini for 2 cents each in 1911. City officials attempted to regulate the pushcart trade repeatedly from 1905 through 1925, citing public health concerns that had more to do with the vendor's nationality than the safety of the food. The arancini kept selling. The carts kept moving. The grandmothers kept frying. Number 9. Homemade wine. In 1920, Prohibition made the production of wine illegal in the United States. There is a provision in the Volstead Act that permitted a household to produce 200 gallons of non-intoxicating cider and fruit juice per year for personal consumption. Italian immigrant families read this provision carefully, decided that wine fell under fruit juice if you were flexible about definitions, and kept making wine in their basements and back rooms as they had always done. Italian immigrant households that produced their own wine were technically in violation of Prohibition in most interpretations. Federal agents raided Italian neighborhoods at rates disproportionate to any other community. They found wine. They usually drank some of it before they filed the report. Home wine in an Italian-American household in 1922 cost about 12 cents a gallon to produce. It appeared on the Sunday table in a ceramic jug without a label. It was poured into small glasses. It was drunk with the meal by everyone, including children. It was not a violation. It was Sunday lunch. Number 8. Bacala mantecato. Salt cod whipped with warm olive oil until it became a white, cloud-like cream that could be spread on toast or eaten from a spoon. It tasted of almost nothing like the hard, salt-preserved plank it had started as 48 hours earlier. The transformation was achieved by patience and a wooden spoon. The desalted, poached cod was worked by hand. The olive oil was added slowly while the fish was beaten against the side of the bowl. The two emulsified into something that the Venetian immigrants who made it called bacala mantecato, and that modern restaurants call brandade and charge $24 for. Salt cod cost 8 cents a pound in 1920. Olive oil cost 32 cents a quart. The work of making it cost nothing except an arm that ached by the end. Venetian immigrant families in the waterfront neighborhoods of New York and Baltimore made this for Christmas and Easter, and whenever the budget required something that tasted expensive but was not. It looked like luxury. It cost like Tuesday. That gap was the whole point. Fourth pattern, break. Here is what nobody says out loud about these recipes. They are disappearing. Not because the food stopped being good, because the women who knew them are gone. A grandmother dies in Brooklyn in 1994 and takes with her the exact feel of the dough for her Easter bread, the one her mother brought from Sicily in 1909. Her daughter knows the recipe, mostly, not the exact temperature of the water, not the exact number of minutes to knead, not the small adjustments her mother made without thinking because her hands had been making it for 60 years. The daughter makes it close enough. Her daughter, the granddaughter, buys it from a bakery. The great-granddaughter does not know it exists. 4 generations, 3 steps, the recipe is gone. Nobody wrote it down because nobody believed a recipe that had survived a steerage crossing and prohibition and selective enforcement of tenement codes could possibly be forgotten by its own family. That is how most of the food on this list is being lost, not through a law, not through a raid, through the quiet arithmetic of time and distance and grandchildren who were busy. The inspectors could not stop it. The agents could not stop it. What is stopping it now is that the people who carried it did their work and went home, and nobody was standing close enough to the stove to learn what they already knew. If your grandmother made any of these, call her this week. Write it down. Stand in her kitchen. Time is the only inspector that ever actually succeeded. Number 7. Sardi in Seor. Sardines fried crisp in olive oil, then layered in a ceramic dish with slow-cooked onions, vinegar, pine nuts, and raisins, and left to marinate for 24 hours. The fish absorbed the sweet and sour liquid. The whole preparation turned into something that tasted of Venice and time, and the particular genius of a kitchen that understood preservation. Sardi and Seor originated as a Venetian fisherman's dish designed to keep fried fish edible for days at sea. Venetian immigrant families in the waterfront neighborhoods of New York and Baltimore made it every Friday and ate from it through Sunday. Sardines cost 4 cents a pound in 1918 at the fish markets of Mulberry Street and Pell Street. The onions were 2 cents. The vinegar was homemade. The pine nuts were a luxury that nonetheless cost under a dime. The dish that resulted tasted like something that had taken a week. It cost nothing close to what it delivered. Number 6. Caponata caponata is a Sicilian sweet and sour eggplant preparation that requires the cook to understand that a vegetable can be more than one thing at the same time. Sweet from sugar, sour from vinegar, savory from tomatoes and capers and olives. All of these things at once, balanced through long cooking until the eggplant collapses and the flavors meld, and the whole mixture turns a deep mahogany brown and smells of something complex and ancient. Eggplant was 3 cents a pound in September in 1931. Capers came in small jars that cost a dime and lasted months. Sicilian immigrant families in New Orleans and Brooklyn made caponata by the jarful every autumn and served it through the winter. As an appetizer, as a side dish, as a topping for grilled bread, as a late-night snack eaten cold from the jar when the week had been long and nothing else was available. It improved with time. Most things in a Sicilian kitchen did. Number 5. Ribollita. Ribollita means reboiled in Italian, which tells you immediately that this is a dish built on the philosophy of nothing wasted. Day-old bread, leftover beans, leftover vegetables, leftover broth. All combined and cooked together until the bread absorbed the liquid and the soup thickened around the bread and the line between the two disappeared entirely. By Sunday, it was barely a soup at all. It was something dense and savory you could eat with a fork. A loaf of day-old bread cost 2 cents in 1925. The beans and vegetables were leftovers. Tuscan immigrant families in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and New Haven made this through the Depression years. They did not consider it Depression food. They considered it what you made when you understood that yesterday's food was not gone. It was still becoming something. Number 4. Porchetta, whole roasted pork. The skin scored and rubbed with garlic, rosemary, fennel seed, black pepper, and salt. Rolled tight, tied with string, roasted over a wood fire or in a very hot oven for 3 hours until the skin crackled and shattered at the touch and the fat beneath had rendered into the meat, and the whole apartment smelled of something that made the neighbors knock on the door to ask what was happening. A pork shoulder cost 20 cents a pound in 1928. One shoulder fed 10 people, sliced thin on bread with a smear of the cooking juices. It was Sunday lunch. Monday's sandwich. Tuesday's soup starter. Wednesday's bean stew enrichment. Nothing about a pig that went through an Italian grandmother's kitchen was wasted. Not a single piece. Number 3. Lampredotto sandwich. This is the one that stops people. Lampredotto is the fourth stomach of a cow. The abomasum, the one closest in flavor and texture to the sea. Something briny and gelatinous, and deeply, specifically itself. Florentine immigrants in New York and New Jersey brought the tradition of simmering it for 2 hours in broth with tomato, celery, onion, and parsley until it turned soft enough to slice. Loaded onto a hard roll, dipped in the cooking broth, topped with salsa verde and a pinch of crushed chili. The fourth stomach of a cow cost 3 cents a pound in 1918 at the wholesale butchers of Lower Manhattan. It was the cheapest cut available because almost no one outside Florentine immigrant communities understood what to do with it. The women who did bought it by the pound and fed their families on it through weeks when the more desirable cuts were beyond reach. A Florentine street food seller named Aldo Bacci began selling it from a cart on Mulberry Street in 1922. The city shut his cart down twice. He moved twice. By 1925, he had a line every morning before 8 o'clock. Some things cannot be regulated out of existence because the people eating them want them too much. Number 2. Caciocavallo. This is the oldest cheese in the Italian immigrant tradition. Older than pizza, older than pasta as most Americans understand it. Documented in southern Italian cooking since the 14th century and brought to America in the pockets and trunks of the women who left Campania and Calabria and Sicily between 1880 and 1920 and immediately set about aging it in whatever cool, dark space their new apartments offered, a round of caciocavallo made from whole milk, shaped by hand and hung in pairs from a rope in a cool corner of the kitchen or a building basement until the rind hardened and the interior developed a sharpness that deepened with every week. It could be eaten young when it was mild and supple and good for melting. It could be eaten aged when it was firm and sharp and grated over pasta in place of the more expensive Parmesan. Making cheese in a residential apartment was prohibited under New York City health codes from 1902 onward. The codes were enforced selectively, which is a polite way of saying they were enforced in Italian neighborhoods and not elsewhere. Women who were found aging cheese were fined amounts that usually represented a week's food budget. They paid the fine. They made more cheese. The cost of the milk was 12 cents a quart in 1910. The value of the cheese it became was worth every risk. The grandmothers were not trying to make a product. They were trying to keep a tradition alive, one rope of cheese at a time, in a country that had not yet decided whether it would allow them to be themselves. Number 1. Concetta's Sunday Sauce. Concetta Ferrara started her Sunday sauce at 6 in the morning, not because the recipe required it, though it did, because starting at 6 was what her mother had done in Calabria and her mother's mother before her. And the time of the starting was itself part of what the sauce was. Olive oil heated in the bottom of the widest pot she owned, a pour that would have struck any American cook of 1912 as recklessly generous. Garlic, 2 whole cloves, dropped in and allowed to color slowly until the oil around them turned the palest gold, and the kitchen filled with a smell that drifted under the door, down the hallway, down the stairs, out onto the street below, where it mixed with the morning air of South Philadelphia and announced to the neighborhood that it was Sunday. Crushed tomatoes from the can, 35 cents for the large size in 1915. Meatballs rolled the night before and browned first in a separate pan. Sausage, a piece of pork neck for richness, everything lowered into the tomatoes. The heat dropped to the lowest the stove would hold. Concetta walked away and let it work. When the city health inspectors arrived at her building in 1912 on a complaint about the smell, her neighbors stood in the doorway of the building and would not move. 12 families, every one of them Italian. The inspectors left. The sauce finished at 2 o'clock. Concetta served 12 people at her kitchen table, which seated 8. The rest stood. Nobody minded. Her granddaughter Rosaria still makes it. Same time, same pot, same smell on the stairs. That has never changed. It will not change. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. The pasta e fagioli. You likely have the ingredients already. The aglio e olio, which requires nothing but garlic, olive oil, pasta, and 20 minutes of patience. Or Concetta's Sunday sauce. Started at 6 in the morning and eaten at 2. The way she did it, the way her mother did it, the way the smell of it once drifted down a tenement staircase in South Philadelphia and stopped a housing inspector in his tracks. I made the ribollita last winter from Thursday's bean soup and Friday's stale bread. Stirring it on a Saturday morning, I felt for the first time like I understood something about what it means to cook with full attention to nothing going to waste. It was not a compromise meal, it was a completed thought. Tell me in the comments which one you are going to try. I want to know if Concetta's Sunday sauce gets more love than the pasta e fagioli. If anyone's grandmother still makes caciocavallo, or hangs anything to age in a back room, or cures her own fat back in a basement cold corner, tell me which region of Italy she came from and what she calls it. Because these were not just recipes, they were proof that you cannot legislate a culture out of its kitchen, that the food a people carry across an ocean does not need permission to survive, that the smell of garlic and olive oil rising through a tenement staircase in 1912 was not a nuisance. It was a declaration of identity so powerful that 12 families stood in a doorway to protect it. The inspectors are gone. The sauce is still on the stove.